Matthew 6:22. The lamp of the body is the eye. If therefore your eye is good, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? I think this verse is actually related to the verses that come before and after it, but it's specific to the eye, and what it says to me is very, very, very clearly what you put in to yourself is going to determine who you are. I compare the brain to a room full of file cabinets an awful lot, and every time you look at something, you're sticking another image in one of those files in that file cabinet. And I know for myself, I stuck images in that file cabinet that came out of magazines I shouldn't have been looking at back when I was in college. And if I want to, I can still go open up one of those file cabinets and pull out one of those images and look at it. I try real hard not to do that, but the fact is, if you don't put it in there, you don't have to worry about it coming back out. Brother David preached a message several years ago, and it may have been on this passage, I don't recall, but I remember him using the acronym GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. And I think what Jesus is saying, I'm confident that what Jesus is saying is that what you take in is going to determine who you are, what you are full of. If you're taking in trash, if you're taking in garbage, if you're taking in filth, if you're taking in ungodliness, that's what your body will be full of. If on the other hand you take in things that are wholesome, things that are true, things that are honest, things that are godly, things that are healthy, things that are biblical, then that's what you're going to be full of. And it's, how can you fill yourself with garbage and then expect good things to come back out? Likewise, if you fill yourself up with good things, then those will be at your disposal, and those will be the things that can come out. And even though he's talking about the eye, and I think the eye is certainly the source of most of what's in us, and we certainly can control what we look at and don't look at. I would certainly argue that this goes for what we listen to. I don't know if 2,000 years ago, we know they were putting words to music because we know that Jesus and his disciples sang hymns. I don't know if they had songs back then, if people sang songs that glorified fornication and other ungodly things like they do now. But I know that I have to be careful when I go into Walmart or Tractor Supply or any place where they've got music going, and I'll have men say to me, "Oh, Ted, you're such a fuddy-dud. Those are golden oldies." I said, I don't care if they're golden oldies or not. If they're golden oldies glorifying sexual immorality, they're ungodly, and I don't need to be humming them. I don't need to be singing them. I don't want to be hearing them. And I know from my brain, because I used to own those albums and listen to those albums, I might walk into Walmart and it might be track 2 off that album, and by the time I'm halfway home, I'm realizing that I'm humming along. I'm on track 5 of that album now, and it's triggered that because it's opened that file cabinet up. And so I think I'm confident Jesus is saying, be really careful what you look at. Be careful what you allow your eyes to take in. Be careful what you allow your ears to take in. Because if you're filling yourself up with rubbish, then that's what you're going to be full of. When I'm talking to the guys in jail, an example they all understand perfectly well is that I used to, when we first were going over to Bastrop, they would take us in the old, actually they didn't even have the new jail, it was the old jail, and we'd go in the employee entrance, and then we'd have to walk down the halls to get to the multi-purpose room where where we did our Bible study, and those old cells, those old dorms in the old building had big Lexan panels, and so as you walked by you could look into the tanks, and a lot of them had a television that was facing where as you walked by you could see what was on the television. It didn't take me very long to quit doing that, because oftentimes, unless there was a football game on, the television was turned to a station called Telemundo. Now, I don't know much about Telemundo except I think they do news, and I think they do what we would call soap operas, and maybe they do sitcoms. But what they're known for is very shapely women with very, 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 very low-cut clothing on. Hispanic stations, right. And when I bring that up as an example in the cells, everybody knows exactly what I'm talking about and where I'm going with that, because a lot of the guys who are watching these shows don't speak Spanish, aren't trying to learn to speak Spanish. They're filling themselves up with what maybe feels good to the flesh at the moment, what maybe gets the hormones flowing at the moment, but it's filling us up with stuff that's ungodly, that's going to lead us to have thoughts about fornication, that's going to be bad for our marriage, whether we're married now or whether we get married in the future. And Jesus tells us that if we fill ourselves up with darkness, how great is that darkness? So I think he's admonishing us very specifically to be very careful about what we look at. And I was thinking about this just this morning, and I think that extends to, for example, what we read. And it may seem innocent enough at the time. I was thinking about the news. I don't have a television, but I do have a phone. And there's a thing called iNews that pops up, and I'm not a subscriber, so I can't read a lot of the articles. But just looking at the headlines, I know there's a lot of stuff on the news that, even if I could read it, I shouldn't be reading it. I don't need to know. I need to know that Satan is alive and well in the world, and I need to be watching my family and my friends and my coworkers, and I need to be alert to Satan's wiles. But I don't need to be reading up and studying up on his victories and the things he's getting away with and the things he's pulling off in the world right now. I don't believe I need to be filling myself up with that stuff. And that really, I think that really is the point. It's a whole lot easier not to put it in the first place than it is to put it in and then have to deal with the consequences. And Jesus knew that and told us that. If therefore the light that is in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Now, we need to put this with some other verses. This is not saying that you can't have money, that having money is a problem. In fact, the Bible tells us very specifically that the one that does not work should not eat. The Bible tells us very specifically that the one that does not provide for those of his own household is worse than an unbeliever. I think the key word here is serve. You cannot serve God and serve money. If money is what you're a slave to, if money is what's driving you, if money is what's making all of your decisions, that's a problem, because that will keep you from serving God. And I'm not going to try to tell anybody where that balance is. We grow up being taught that this is America, the land of opportunity, and what that means is if you work hard, get the right job, or whatever it means, but prosper. And we think of prosperity as being in possession of a lot of money. The Bible does say, in fact, I'm just going to turn over to 1 Timothy, the 6th chapter, where we read some more about money. This is 1 Timothy 6:9. But those who desire to be rich, and that's the word desire. That means of the flesh. That's the word epithumia, that's often translated lust. Those who desire to be rich fall into temptation and a snare and into many foolish and harmful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, for which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. But then he jumps right over in verse 17 and says, command those who are rich in this present age not to be haughty, nor to trust in uncertain riches, but in the living God, who gives us richly all things to enjoy. Let them do good, that they may be rich in good works, ready to give, willing to share, storing up for themselves a good foundation for the time to come, that they may lay hold on eternal life.
One of the things of all things, the church in Corinth would take the Lord's Supper, that they had a feast, a meal, on Sunday nights. That was when they would meet. And they were having people come and they'd bring their fancy food, but they'd make sure nobody got it but those at their table. And there were poor people there that didn't have anything to eat. And they were getting their feelings hurt and getting a bad opinion of who Christ was and who we Christians are. And to think, how could the devil do something like that? Through greed, through grittiness, through selfishness, through wanting to show off, through wanting to brag. Look, I've got these special hot dogs here, you can't have those.
Those Hebrew dogs.
Hebrew National. I think some of them were even fancier than that. But instead of blessing the church, it was a curse to the church, and it's a curse especially to people that they were bringing into the church. How in the world could the devil do that? Well, that's his forte. That's exactly what he wants to do.
Over in the 19th chapter of Matthew, Jesus says, assuredly, 19:23, assuredly I say to you that it is hard for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And again I say to you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. When his disciples heard it, they were greatly astonished, saying, who then can be saved? And what's interesting, he's been talking about children, he's been talking about sinning brothers, he's been talking about celibacy, he's been talking about sex and marriage, and nobody's astonished. But then he says, it's hard for rich people to get into heaven, and they're astonished because they had this notion that, and I run into people all the time who still believe this, that if somebody is prosperous, they must be finding favor with God. That's how God rewards people, is by making them prosperous. Now, the Bible doesn't say that, but we believe that. We get taught that. We sort of mix up biblical standards and capitalist American standards, and we think, if you work hard and you pick the right job and you're faithful and you do good, you should be rewarded with money. And the disciples.
Joel Osteen again, are you?
And the disciples were caught up in that too, and they were greatly astonished, saying, who then can be saved? If a rich person can't be saved, who can get saved?
Who were their examples? The Sadducees and the Pharisees.
Exactly. And unfortunately, it also speaks to a prejudice against poor people. And that we have to be, I don't think we suffer from that in this church, but I have certainly been in churches where people who were not dressed nicely, didn't look like they were people of means, were discouraged from coming. What a shame. But Jesus looked at them and said to them, with men this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. Now, it immediately appears that Jesus is saying, with men it is impossible for a rich person to get into heaven. I think what he's saying is it's impossible for a person to get, without God, it's impossible for a person to get into heaven at all. But with God, all things are possible. Even rich people going to heaven. And again, God elaborates some over in Timothy. Yes.
Something that's on my